Hello, it's Shelley F bringing you Positive Changes, a self-kick podcast. So today on the show, we're joined by Marie Alessi, and she's founder of Loving Life After Loss. So good morning to Marie.
Good morning to you. Thank you for having me.
Bless you. Thank you for being here. So we've spoken before, and I am so passionate about getting you on the show. So please do share your amazing story of positive change.
Well, my amazing story of positive change actually has a bit of a sad beginning, but don't worry, there is a happy ending. I will share this with you. So it all started, well, how far back do I go? I'll give it to you in a nutshell. I moved to Australia when I was roughly 31, met my beautiful husband to be only 10 months after I moved here, funny enough. So it was quite shortly after I finally moved to Australia, which was my biggest dream ever. Met him, and another 10 months later, we got married. And it was quite funny and such because, you know, if you would have told me that before, I would have gone like, no way, I'm not going to get married to somebody that I've only just met 10 months prior. But when I met Rob, I was like, there's no questions asked. It all made sense. You know, it's one of those things when people say, how do you know? And then you get this, when you know, you know. I'm like, what do you say when you know, you know? But I experienced it myself, and I was like, oh, that's what they were talking about. Awesome. Yep. So we got married. We had two beautiful boys. And when they were 10 and 8, I received a very dreadful phone call from coroners that my husband has deceased in a hotel room away on a business trip. And as you can imagine, like my whole world stood still. It was like when you receive a phone call like that, it is so unexpected. It is really something that you just never expect. He was in the prime of his life, 45, super fit, healthy. There was no forewarning whatsoever. And then all of a sudden, you know, he's away on a business trip. And I had a bit of an incline this morning because he was supposed to wake me up at 7:30, and I never received that phone call. And all day it just kept building up, and I was starting to worry, and I'm texting him and trying to call him. And then I really sat with it, and I had this really bizarre vision of him collapsing in the shower. So somehow I found out the hotel that he stayed, because he had actually put it in my calendar. He'd often done that. He's like, I want to know where you are. I want you to know where I am when we're traveling, when we're out for business, in case something happens. So it's really bizarre that he always had this. And I found the name of the hotel. I rang the hotel. I told them who I am. I didn't want to freak them out. I'm like, I know this sounds really weird. I'm not one of those freaked out wife stalking her husband. I have a really bizarre feeling that something might have happened. Can you please send somebody up to his room just to set my mind at ease, you know? And they said they would, and never got back to me. And that, as you can imagine, just, you know, upped my anxiety levels. And I'm like, they're hiding something. They're not telling me. And they did, because they were obviously not supposed to tell me. They have the procedures. But this is what happened. So my world like literally stood still, and it felt like it was put on slow motion. I was actually at that very wall behind me there, the red wall, when I received the phone call. And I just sunk to the floor, and I sat there, and I was like, what now, you know? So I did the worst thing I ever had to do in my life. I went downstairs and had to share the news with my 8 and my 10-year-old at the time. And there was a lot of screaming and a lot of tears involved. And we need to get to that positive change, don't we? I'm trying to get through all of that, because it was just so much to deal with.
It's beautiful.
Well, we had to go through this whole, you know, flying over there to the other side of Australia, identifying his body, doing the funeral, and all of that. And the more I went on to my grieving journey and got out of this, I call that functioning mode. Like at first I was just in functioning mode, and I did day by day what I had to do. But then when it came back to, you know, getting back into your life after the funeral, which is always a very bizarre moment because everything's completely different, nothing's the same anymore. This is when I started realizing day by day that I was handling grief very differently to most people I knew, to the point where it's actually people started talking to me, trying to help me or making suggestions or giving me advice on what to expect, how to grieve, where I always felt like, this isn't me, I've got a better solution for that. This isn't me, I've got a better answer for that. And not in a cocky sort of ego sort of way, but in a heart-centered, this doesn't feel right sort of way, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So I went through my grieving journey in my very own way. I even got to the point where I had a massive nervous breakdown, screaming in the kitchen, and that was due to the fact that I felt bombarded with too much expectations, negativity, all of that, and I was like, I can't handle this, I just need peace and quiet. And I literally had a meltdown, massive meltdown in the kitchen, where I was screaming my lungs out, and I was just literally screaming for peace and quiet because I got so overwhelmed with advice and expectations and what to expect that I'm like, I can't handle this. I literally needed to block all of that out. So I went on to talk to a positive psychologist because I'm like, I had a nervous breakdown, I need to talk to somebody. What am I doing with this? And I remember this very moment, which is actually this beautiful planting the seed moment for this positive change, when my psychologist sat there and I'm telling her about all this expectation of people, and this is overwhelming me. And she looked at me super calmly and said to me, so what does grief mean to you, Marie? And I was like, wow. Okay, so I said, I know this sounds really weird, but the first word that comes up is empowerment. And she's like, wow, this is so beautiful. And I thought she would think I'm nuts, but she was like, this is so beautiful, And so I have to admit, it came quite as a surprise to me that this word was the first word that popped up, but I went with it. And to fast forward, what happened thereafter was I actually wrote a book about the whole experience that I called Loving Life After Loss. And I wrote about how I met Rob, how I fell in love with him, how we got married, had the 2 beautiful boys, lived like the dream life, and how I lost him very unexpectedly and how I dealt with it. So it was the whole story of my life in a nutshell. And when I published this book, it not only made it to Amazon #1 bestseller, which I have to admit is easy to do if you know how to work the numbers, but it actually made it to, I shouldn't say that, but that's the way it is. There's so many Amazon bestsellers out there. When you know how to do it, you know how to work it. And I had a lovely lady teaching me how to do it, so it was really quite easy for me. And she said to me, she's like, that's easy to achieve, Marie. What you want to go for is the top 100 list in Australia. And I was like, ooh, that sounds amazing. And I just couldn't believe that I reached that on the very first day I published my book. I got onto 61 of the top 100 lists in Australia. And you know what? That was the moment when I realized I had something that the world needed. The world needed permission to handle grief differently and not just get stuck in suffering. And yeah, so that was the beginning of my positive change. I knew this was something that I had to pursue as my calling. That was the whole start of it, really.
See, I absolutely love that, and I think people know my background's nursing.
Yeah.
And with that, as much as health, there's also death, and so I deal with grief quite a lot. And we connected because obviously your tagline is like loving life after loss, and I'm like,
yeah,
okay. So we dug a little delve, and you said it was your husband, and I was really surprised, but oh so grateful that our paths crossed, because when I used to work in medicine, people would say sort of like, and it could cause your relationship breakdown, and you're not going to relate to your kids anymore, and it's going to take 5 years to get over, if you ever get over it.
Yeah.
And I think we're given this a lot. This is going to hurt, it's going to be painful, you're going to cry. And yes, absolutely, for some, but it's only like 5% in reality. And the other 95% of us have this great, as you say, empowerment available to us. And I loved that we connected and that you shared it. Were
Me
you
too. I'm very grateful.
Yeah, it's just beautiful. And it's just like when you moved and it was 10 months, met Rob, it was 10 months, and then you had the joy, all this knowing, this openness. Were you aware that you were open, or was life just feeding you all these moments?
I was quite, well, I think it grew over the years. It wasn't instant awareness. It was, I always had, people always ask me about my story, about how I came to Australia. And I felt like, I don't know how to explain it in other words. I always had this deep knowing this calling to come to Australia. It was like a calling that I have to be there, and I couldn't explain why. It was just deep within me. I knew this was where I had to be, and I just followed that calling. And it took me like 12 times of flying back and forth. The 12th time was actually the one-way flight to Australia, and I knew that's when I'm staying. So it was all in a planning and a making, and I wanted to do it the proper way. But it all started with a calling. So I always had quite strong intuition about where I need to be, what needs to happen in my life, and that just got stronger and stronger over the years. And I worked as a coach. I did a lot of working with mindset, with subconscious mind, and all of that. So the more I did that, the stronger that got. And then when I lost Rob, it just completely went through the roof. So intuition has just exploded, and it became my absolute guidance for everything, for personal decisions, for business decisions, for everything. And I remember shortly after losing him, turning to a kinesiologist and checking in with her about a course that came up on Facebook, funny enough, and it was a shamanic course. I'm like, I really got this thing, and can you test this for me? Is this right for me? And it was funny, she came back to me 2 days later. So it was a weekend that I asked her, so she must have waited till Monday, and she said, yeah, I could test this for you. I could probably give you an answer, but you know what? You probably know the answer already within. And I'm like, yeah, but that's not what I wanted to hear. I wanted, And she said to me, look, I'm going to say this to you, Marie, because it comes up really, really strongly. The lesson in this for you is to trust your own inner guidance and stop asking for permission and all of that around you. Stop asking other people. You know the answer. And as much as I didn't want to hear it, I soaked it up and I took it, and I was like, wow, I needed to hear that right there and right then. And I went with it. I took it and I went with it, and it was the most amazing, most beautiful gift to receive that message and to actually really take it and live it. So
yeah, like another empowerment almost.
Exactly. Oh yes, absolutely.
So you're very intuitive, and that must be one of the tools you use, but you help so many people to like embrace the positive take on grief, the other side of sadness. So when you're working with people who are grieving, what tools do you use? What's the starting point of their positive change?
So for that, I probably need to share, because we had this pre-chat, but I think what is missing, the missing link here is I actually I went on to start a movement out of the book Loving Life After Loss. I then started a movement called Loving Life After Loss. I took the same title because I feel it's like a pre-selector for those people who come into this group. And in this group, I have various offerings, actually. So they range, like there's a complete price range as well that comes with it. And there's free offerings and there's paid offerings. But what I do is there are different healing journeys that I take people on. So one is a 5-day that I call Heart to Heart. And in this 5 days, it's like a bit of a taste test where people learn one tool each day. And everything that I share, everything in all the programs that I share has got something to do with change in perspective, because I believe that's the biggest tool there is, that you look at your situation, at your grief from a different angle. And it is really beautiful, because often for those who are stuck in the suffering, in the pain, in this really horrible grief pain that we sometimes can feel on a physical level, even when it's really that intense, and in particular when it's fresh, to find a way or find tools to step out of that and look at it from a different angle. It's already shifting a lot, when you said the other side of sadness, it's again, like everything has got two sides. And as horrible and life-changing as a death might be, I always share something that I call, there are hidden gifts in adversity. I call it the hidden gifts, because with every death that you experience in your life that really affects you, when you allow yourself to actually step back and look at the bigger picture, there's always a hidden gift that comes with it. And that is, just one of many tools that I use in my journey to actually guide people in a very gentle way to look at that. Because when a person comes to you that has lost, let's say, their husband, and it's really fresh, you can't just go like, it's like, oh, so what did you learn from it? It's like a slap in the face. You just can't, you know. It's like, it really takes time for people to get to the space where they're actually allowed to. So for me, it's that building them up step by step to that space where you can actually gently ask that question and say, what is the hidden gift in this, you know? Because the price that you pay, the loss, it's quite a high price to pay. So you may as well allow yourself to look at the gift that you get from that, you know, but it's a very gentle accompanying them on that journey, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that's beautiful. You say hidden gift, and I think it's beautiful. I say like a collateral beauty. So despite the pain of
Yeah,
anything, whether it's like you've lost a job or a husband,
yeah,
when you've
yeah,
had a loss, there's often a lesson in it. You know, maybe it hurts like hell, but
yeah,
there is something, as you say, it's that perspective, isn't it?
yeah,
And I think it's quite hard. I mean, I think grief hits you hard, but I think grief's quite hard because you're with your, you know, your physical, your intellectual, your emotional, your social things all going on.
yeah,
But society, when they're just telling you how to grieve, often by
mm,
people who haven't even been through grief,
yeah,
it's really hard because, you know, you're just, as you said, like you just sort of scream and thinking, be quiet, for God's sake. I don't want to know if it
yeah,
cost me that relationship, I lose my job, you know,
yeah,
my life's over.
yeah,
But you have that, I don't know if people are aware of their intuition, but we have that niggle like of, I know, carry on, find sense, don't we?
yeah, absolutely. And I think, you know, the most important thing to understand in this is that people naturally, deep down inside, want to be happy. Nobody wants to be miserable, even when some people get to that space where so much has happened that it was layer upon layer upon layer, that this wanting to be happy might be completely covered up. But the natural state of any person is that we want to be happy. We don't want to be miserable. We don't want to be sad. We don't want to be suffering and experience pain. We want to live life. We might have lost the will to live. We might have lost the hope. We might have lost the ability to see that there might be healing out there. I understand all that. And in particular with those who have experienced lots of layers of trauma, of abuse, of grief, of you name it. But the natural state of all of us is that we want happiness. That's just the way it is, you know.
That is so beautiful. I absolutely love that because I know it's hard to say because we always think that society is going to go, what do you think you're saying? You know, there's some people out there
Yeah,
going like, this is, you know, out of order.
yeah,
But we've been there, we've had the loss, and there is that resilience, that drive to go on. But obviously we've connected before. Could you share how you and Rob just spoke about, you know, if the unthinkable ever
yeah,
happens? Because I just think it's a
yeah,
conversation so many people should
absolutely.
have.
I believe so too. I really feel that it is a beautiful conversation to have when you are in a loving relationship, that you say, what if, you know, what if something was to happen to us? And we had this conversation a couple of times when there were certain triggers. Like I remember Rob driving home from work one day and he said, oh my God, I've heard this story of this 4-year-old boy that died in a car accident. And he said, imagine, because, well, I think our younger boy was roughly that age at that stage when he told me that. I was like, oh my God, can you imagine? And I remember both of us getting really emotional about it, just thinking about it, because when you're a parent, you know, your kids are the same age, you hear something like that, it really pulls on your heartstrings. You really go like, oh my God, you know, how on earth, and what will we do? And then of course we had these conversations, what would you do if something was to happen to me or to you, you know, how would you? And we both said, because we had a very loving relationship, and we were both like, I would want you to be happy. I would want you to find love again. I would want you. And I remember saying that to Rob. I said, I love you so much. I can't imagine you not being with someone. You're depriving people out there. If you don't share your love, you have to find someone. And I also wanted it for the boys. I said, you know, I would not want the boys to grow up completely without a mother figure in their life. And I know that there is no replacement. There is no replacing your biological dad or mom. But there can be a mother figure, there can be a father figure out there for them. And that's what I wish for you, because I love you and I love my children. And that's what you just wish for someone when you truly love them. It's not about the ego, it's about you want them to be happy. And I'm really glad we had these conversations, because I knew he and I both meant that wholeheartedly. Yet, you know, you always think it's theory, but then one day it might happen, and it did happen in our lives. So I really urge anyone listening to this to have this conversation, because it's quite beautiful to have, actually.
I just think it is really powerful. I mean, I try and have this conversation with my husband, and he's just
Mm.
sort of like, I don't want to talk about it. And he's Mr.
Yeah.
Science, whereas I'm more spiritual. So
Mm.
I'm thinking, well, we still communicate. Don't
Yeah,
get me wrong, I'll be absolutely rubbish, I'm
absolutely.
sure, if he died. But I
Yeah.
just think it's a real beauty in having the conversation, the openness, like what if, what
Yeah,
happens kind of thing. I
I believe
really
so
do.
too. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like, you know, people have a will kit, like they write their will, and they talk about these things, and not everybody does. Like, we have talked about it for so long that we actually never got around to do it, which was horrible, because I had to deal with so much else after that, and it really did put a huge span in the works that we didn't write the will out. So that's my other urge to people, to always go like, do that, you know, go and get your will done, because it will really help the person who is left behind. You have to handle all that paperwork. It really
Yeah.
overcomplicates things if you don't have that, because if you don't make the decision, somebody else will make it for you. You know, that's the harsh
Yeah.
reality of it. And weirdly enough, finally, after Rob passed, that was the first thing I did, because I thought now it's really like it's a 50-50 chance, you know, if something was to happen to me now, then who would make the decision? What would happen with our children? I don't want anybody else to make the decision, and now it's only me. I better do it now. So that was my first thing I did after all the funeral and all of that was over. I sat with my lawyer and said, I know you were right. I know you tried to say this to me for all these years, but I think now is the time to do that. So, yeah.
It is really important, isn't it?
Mm.
So that was the beautiful how you and Rob had that conversation about, you know,
Mm.
what happens, could you,
Yeah.
would you, should you, kind of thing.
Yeah.
I was
Yeah.
saying earlier about how grief is, it's quite hard to say. I'm very aware as I'm saying it, but grief is very negative. And I know, I mean, I'm going through anticipatory grief at the moment as we're here today. And grief
Yeah.
is really hard. But do you think that some people struggle with grief, with finding the joy and the resilience
Yeah, absolutely.
out of duty of
Yeah.
the one that has passed, because they've not had those
It's
conversations?
that. It's definitely that. I come across it all the time in my movement, as you can imagine, because that's what it's all about. So it's a lot of people feel that this is their last connection that they have with their loved one who has passed. So if I was to let go of that, then I lose even more of him or her. And the truth is actually complete opposite. The connection lies in the beautiful memories that you have, and keeping those beautiful memories alive. The connection lies in the love. When you feel that love, when your emotions and your focus goes to the separation, the grief, the loss, the pain that you feel is the absence of that love that you had in your life. So when you focus on that, the absence grows. Everything you focus on grows bigger. You know, when you focus
Yeah.
on the grief, on the pain, then you feel even more of that absence and even more of that pain. It's like a downward spiral. Yet when you get to a space of, I know it's hard, it's hard to understand that, and it's a lot easier said than done, but when you get to the space of acceptance, that you're like, okay, this loved one has passed, it is horrible, it hurts like hell, it sucks, let's face it. But when you get to this space of acceptance and really focus on the love that you had in your life and the beautiful memories, and focus on that, that's when you feel that connection a lot more than when you focus on the loss. Does that make sense? So whatever you
Yeah.
focus on is what grows bigger. And often it is the expectation of society that is put upon us, as in, you know, you're supposed to fall apart, you're supposed to cry, you're supposed to wear black for a year, or whatever those weird old-fashioned stigmas around grief are. They're not serving us. They're not serving us any longer. They're very old-fashioned, and I feel that it's really time for us to revolutionize grief and allow people to feel joy and happiness again, because that's what everybody wants. But we feel guilty when we do. I can't possibly feel like that because I've just lost my husband. Well, let's ask my husband if he was, you know, still contactable. What do you think he would say? Oh, I want her to cry, or for goodness sake, I want her to be happy.
Yeah.
I know what my husband would say. He would want me to be happy. I know that 100% certain. And I'm absolutely 100% certain that everybody who passes would want exactly that for their loved ones. Nobody would choose like, no, I want her to cry for the rest of her life. No one. in a right mind, not if they love you. So the answer is quite clear, I think, and the direction is quite
Yeah.
clear. So
Yeah, and I think society plays a huge role, and those
a
who
lot of
do
it
try and be positive, because I've run a death cafe here in the UK,
wow.
and and it's lovely because I've got people that have had a loss in the last month. Other people have been like, well, I'm 15 years with my stepdad, but it's people around 8 years, 13
Yeah.
years. There's all different things, but there's so much laughter because it is keeping those memories alive when your family have stopped listening, or when you've told that
Yeah.
story so many times. And as you're
I love
saying,
it.
it's, I always encourage people to move on in the podcast, my book and things like that. But in grief, if you're going back to grab the happy memories to help you move forward, then that's okay. It's when you're using your past to define you, that's your whole life story. I'm a widow, that's my story. And you think you need to, keep going. I believe that, they die here on earth, but I think they are evolving somewhere on their own journey. And as you say, they wouldn't want to look down thinking, oh my gosh, she's bereft, she's sad, my boys are sad, the neighborhood's sad, but it is hard. And I know it's going to resonate with some people and not with others, but that's why we do the work we do, isn't it? Because there's not one way to grieve. We've all got our own story. But, if you're keeping the memory alive and yourself alive, that's a good starting point, isn't it?
And it's such a privilege to have a healthy life. Not everybody is that privileged, and that's what you shared with me before, in when we had our pre-chat. And I love that you said that. It's the privilege of having a life and really honoring that. It's not us that have died, and some people act like that. And I know that might sound super disrespectful to some people, but it's the harsh truth and the beautiful truth that we still have our lives, and that 100% certain that if you ask the loved one that you have lost what they would want for you, it's that change in perspective that is so important, that they would go like, oh my God, I just want her to be happy. That's that simple.
It's beautiful. So you use tools in your group, so that's to change the perspective and to move forward. Do you believe in things like affirmations or sayings, that sort of like positive self-talk? Do you use those at all?
Absolutely. It's I use a process that is very much about observing, just observing what your thought process is like, what your thought patterns are like. Do you tend to think more negative or more positive thoughts? And most of us have a mixture of all of that, which is quite normal. But again, it's where the focus goes, to really allow yourself to observe are my thought patterns more on the negative side and more on the positive side, and to not buy into them if it's the negative stuff, but to observe them and go like, all right, so what's the solution for that? Because we usually have the solution for that, but the first step is always awareness. Awareness is always the first step to change. So if we're not aware that we have negative thought patterns, we cannot possibly change them. So that process of observing is just bringing awareness into our heart where our thought patterns actually lead us to. And when we are aware that they're negative and we can bring ourselves into solution mode, it's a most beautiful way of bringing us back into the positive swing of things, if that makes sense.
I love solution mode.
Yeah.
So the people that come to you, because obviously there's a need, your book went to #1 and all things like this, and you've got quite a large movement, like thousands of people. The Loving Life After Loss, it says what it does on the tin, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Do you work purely with people who've lost their partner, or do other people come?
I work generally with loss. I have to say the majority of people, because I think it's because they can quite relate to what I've gone through. So the majority of people is female and widows in there, but there's also a lot of bereaved mothers. There's a lot of, some people have even come in and said, look, my husband or my wife have not died, yet I've just broken up from a 30-year marriage and I'm going through a massive amount of grief, because that too is a form of loss, and it's a huge loss in my life. And I do allow people to come in, yet I have to say, I'd probably say 95% of the people in my group are female and have lost somebody to death and not to a marriage breakup or something like that. There's the odd percentage in there, but the majority has lost somebody through death. So I hope that answers your question.
No, it does, because I speak about death and mini deaths, and it is like when people have lose a way of life, you know. So anything you've got emotional connection to, which is taken away from you, whether it's a marriage through breakdown or a marriage through death, you still got that void in your life, which will trigger a grief. So I get that.
I fully agree. I have to be careful though with my movement, that I protect the people that are in there by really honoring where they're at. And often I can tell that, like, for example, one perfect example, I had one person that came in that was completely and utterly distraught by losing a pet. And people were like, look, with all due respect, I fully get it, but I mean, you're talking about your dog year has passed. I've lost my child, you know, can you just please not? So I had people reach out to me to say like, look, I just can't handle this. I have to be very honest with you. And for me, it's a learning curve. I've only started this movement last year, you know, so I was also like, oh my God, how do I handle this? I don't want to upset him because he was really distraught. But at the same time, I also want to honor those people who've gone on journeys with me and on programs with me to heal this, and then all of a sudden this comes up for them and they're like, I'm really upset about this. So I did put a new rule in my group to, when people are grieving pets, to please go to another group, because there are pet grieving groups out there, and to really have my focus on humans. So it's also an honoring of different ways how people grieve, and that they go like, okay, I get that, but you know, you can still talk to this person, I can't. So there is a lot of emotion coming up, so I have to be quite aware of honoring all of that, and that's sometimes a little bit tricky, but it's a beautiful way as well, you know, for connecting with people and making them understand and aware of other people's feelings as well.
And it really, as you were saying, it really reminds me of the Death Cafe, because mostly it's people who lost partners or their siblings. But do you find, no matter what your loss is, which death it was, there's like a foundation where you all have the same kind of emotions or starting point or some kind of connection? No matter what the death is, there's something that connects you all.
Yeah, there is definitely something that really connects you, because it is something that nobody else understands. It's almost like, I think for me, the perfect comparison is like being a mom. You know, a lot of people who never had kids, including myself, before I became a mom, when I looked at my mom, I was like, I know what you're talking about. Just, you know, I know exactly what you mean. When she said, oh, you'll understand when you have your own kids, I'm like, I know exactly what you mean. And then I had my own kids. I'm like, oh, that's what you meant. Okay. Yeah, there is a love that you cannot explain to anyone. The love that you have for your children, you cannot explain in words until you actually experience it. And it's the same thing with a loss, you know, unless you have experienced it, you cannot grasp the depth of emotions that it brings up in you, and the pain that it brings up in you. But then there is all these different levels of how people were brought up, what their expectations were when they grew up around grief, what they learned about how to handle grief, how to live with it. And you see that there are huge differences. There are really huge differences in mindset, in wanting to move forward, in wanting to heal, or just wanting to, like, it sounds really harsh, but some people sit there and go like, I just want to die. I just can't handle this, you know. And then you have to go through this process of distinction. Is that really a call out? Is that really suicidal thoughts? Or is that just, under quotation marks, I can't handle this. I don't know. I don't have other words to describe that immense pain, rather than saying I don't want to experience it, you know. So there are a lot of layers that I had to learn how to read these things and how to be able to guide people and point them in the right direction as well, because I'm not here to help everyone. I can't possibly help everyone. Sometimes you just have to hold space for them, allow them to be in the group, but refer them on to other people when they need help from a psychologist, i.e., or from a suicide prevention team, things like that. So I do have a network around me that support me in this, where I'm like, I need help with this, I need help with that, I can focus on that.
Yeah, that's so true. And I love what you were saying, because when I was researching for my next book, Good Grief, I was learning about like how, you know, someone experiences loss, death, how they cope. And it is like, you know, the upbringing, the religion. So what you believe happens before death, at death, after death. And in my nursing, I used to see sort of some families like, you know, this person be slipping into a state of unconsciousness, and they'd be force feeding them food, it looked like, but to me they believed they needed that food to take them into the afterlife. And it's like, what are you going to be met by? Is this the end, or is there something afterwards? And it does shape your grief reality, doesn't it, depending on what you believe in. But when you're trying to balance that up in, like, with your work in a death cafe, because they don't believe in the afterlife and I do, and incarnations, and it's quite an emotive job.
Believe in that.
Does that come up in your work, that you have to, I suppose, be open to it, do you, that some people do believe, others don't?
I have to be very careful in what I say, because I have my own beliefs. I have my own spiritual beliefs about afterlife or previous lives or things like that, that I can't even say cannot. I choose not to share that openly with other people, because I just literally want to be able to hold space for everyone and anyone who needs that, without putting my belief onto them. So I also know there's a lot of people with Catholic beliefs in there, and there is no belief in, or Christian, just to name two very common ones, where there is no before or after or previous lifetimes. They simply just don't believe in that. But I do. So it's something that I'm happy to share here in the podcast with you, that I probably wouldn't share to that extent, also openly in mine, not because I'm trying to hide it, but because I'm trying to hold space for everyone's beliefs in there and allow them to heal, despite or no matter what religious or spiritual beliefs they have, because that's the one thing that I believe everybody deserves and needs: healing.
And I love what you're doing. That's a bit like the Death Cafe, where it's like a non-judgmental, you're coming in, the topic's going to be death and grief, and you're just holding the space. And I don't go, you don't need to know anything else about my life aside from that, but I've been through loss as well, kind of thing. So what tips could you give to someone that's in the muck right now, and they have that little niggle that I want to try and move forward? What could be the first thing they could do?
The first thing that I can do is just listen to it. It sounds really funny that I say that, but the one advice that I give to everyone is to please don't listen to everyone's advice. It's like, literally, when you lose someone, you get swamped with advice. And I'm always like, just listen to your gut instinct. Do whatever feels right for you. If you want to laugh, laugh. If you want to cry, cry. But don't forget that you're okay to do all of that. You're not just supposed to cry because you lost someone. You're allowed to have joy and happiness and love in your life again. So just trust your gut feeling. Don't succumb to the whole pressure and expectations of society, because that's really huge.
Yeah, it is huge. I mean, I've been aware that people sort of say, when people have tried to do the positive, obviously people share their positivity with me, but they say, like, just when you think you've taken a step forward, someone say, well, you're a bit jovial. I didn't smile when my husband died. Oh, you've done your hair.
Yes.
Who's going to see your hair? And I'm like, oh my God, am I actually hearing this? So when you're trying to do the best, when you're listening,
shocking, isn't it?
Be aware that people will still talk to you and still expect you to listen, because it is that sort of,
if
like,
you're too happy, dare you. If you're still crying, have you still not moved on? It's just, there's so much expectations out there, and it's whatever you do, you'll definitely hear somebody expecting you to do the complete opposite. So just shut that out.
It's true though, isn't it?
Business.
People always have something to say, but I often think maybe at least they're being courageous enough to talk to us, because some people just avoid the griever, don't they? I mean, I had people zigzagging across the road.
So
my own, so whilst they're there, they're saying something, they are physically there for you. So maybe, I don't know, thank them.
I also feel like for all of those listening now that think, but how on earth, what am I supposed to say? I would love to say to those who haven't experienced that grief, or who are on the other side and they are, having this encounter, sounds weird, with somebody who's experienced loss, just listen. Just listen to them. Let them talk. Don't feel obliged that you have to share your stories about grief, or your stories that you heard of somebody who dealt with it this, that, or the other way. Just listen to them, because that's all we need when we are grieving. We just need somebody to be there and hold space for us, hold our heart and listen.
That's how my kids that. I say, it's no coincidence that ears look like question marks. they're there.
Yeah.
Do you mean they're there for the questions? And you do,
Yeah.
and I think it's a really good point, Marie. But if you don't know what to say, use another sense and listen.
Yeah.
Don't always feel that silence.
Yeah.
The body
huge.
language, isn't it? It's quite a big thing. So,
Yeah.
be aware.
That's what I also say. If you don't know what to say, just hug me. But not even again, unfortunately, you just never know what's right, what's wrong. Some people need the hug. Other people don't want to be touched. Listen to your gut instinct. That's usually the best advice. Or even if you don't know, just ask. Or even say, look, I really don't know what to say. Do you want me to just sit and listen? Do you want me to just hug you? Do you, don't be shy to ask. It's like often when you ask a very simple question, give them options. Do you prefer one or two? Because you're like, do you want this? Often we don't know what to say, but if somebody says, do you want to hug, yes or no? I'm more than happy to say, like, you know what, today I just rather not, but thank you. Or yes, that's all I need.
And it is that. I mean, people will say, oh, you know where I am if you need me. And that's not helpful when you're in grief. You want to say, tell me what I can do for you now.
Yes.
How are you this morning? Because days can seem really long when you're in grief, can't they? So just like, how are you right now?
Within a second.
That tsunami that comes. You think, I've got this. No, here it comes again.
I love that you say that, because that's the worst thing you can say to somebody who's grieving. Just call me if you need anything. Yeah, right. You don't ever receive that call. I can promise you that.
Yeah, you don't, because you're just overwhelmed. What if you're not there? And then, well, here in England, we always think like we're not very good at asking for help, even worse at accepting it. So
exactly.
But it goes back to your word, empowerment, which I love, because you have so much strength inside. You know yourself better than anyone.
Yeah.
Which I know again comes a bit difficult, like when you do lose a partner. I don't know if you say it over there, but we say other half, and I'd never like that, because you were whole before you met them. You're not half a person now.
Yeah.
But it is, isn't it, learning to date yourself, get to know yourself without that. And it is just
self-love, self-care, huge thing.
Yeah. And I've got to mention it, you just saying, which I think is really beautiful. So what I see with grief is people often get stuck because they're trying to do the same thing in a changed situation. They're trying to act in an abnormal situation. But when Rob died, you actually took the boys on holiday, didn't you? Broke the routine. So how did that come about? How did you know that was a good thing?
It actually came about because Rob and I had a huge vision that we hardly shared with anyone. Like, I think nobody knew that about us, but we had this huge vision of taking the boys out of school for the whole year of 2019 and travel around the world and homeschool them for a whole year. So we had the whole itinerary standing. Even, I don't know if you can see this. See that? There's my whole, that's my vision board of all the countries that we wanted to visit. And my whole, there's 4 doors wardrobe. You can only see 2 of them. It's full of pictures where we wanted to go. We had the itinerary standing, starting in South America and traveling through Europe and Asia and our way back, and literally have an endless summer for a whole year. So we had that in planning, and about half a year before Rob passed away, so it never happened. And when he died, I thought, I can't possibly travel through South America with 2 boys that are 8 and 10. There's no way that I would do that by myself. There are certain countries that I really wanted to do with him or with somebody male to protect us. But you know what I mean? There were just things that I knew I would have done with him, but not without him. So I did a very condensed version of that and traveled around the world with the boys for 2 months. And it was just absolutely beautiful. It was just, I wanted to get away from all the first milestones without him, the first birthdays and Christmases and New Year's and all of that jazz. I just wanted to be away and away from the norm and away from what we would have usually done and create something completely different and happy memories. And that's what we did. So it was really absolutely unbelievable. And the boys still talk about that trip now. So it was really healing for us and very good to just be away from everyone for a while. So
and it's really valid, I think, as we were saying earlier, like when somebody dies, like go back and pull forward those happy memories, but it is about moving forward to create new memories, because I honestly believe they're looking down on us and they will see them. But I think even if you don't believe that, as we said, you're still alive, and create memories, change that routine. So the fact it's still there in your boys' memories, you're creating new memories.
It was super surreal sitting in our pool on the Maldives going like, this is paradise, this is amazing. But it was so healing to have that moment of absolute bliss and beauty and paradise and calm. It was our first stop, and it was so calming us down from this whole hustle and bustle and funeral and emotional overload to, 1 week in absolute paradise. It was just really a beautiful kickoff for a tour around the world.
Oh, I love it.
I still want to go back.
Yeah. There's always the coming home part. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So people, I think, probably have a niggle about what do I do now? And then they're moving forward.
Yeah.
But they can still grieve normally in that, can't they? They can still do like the crying and the snotting and stuff and the anger and stuff like that. So
snot, cry, laugh, repeat. It's all part of it. Yeah.
You should get merchandise on that. Get it on a t-shirt.
That should be a new book title. Your merchandise, yeah. All of the above. Look at us.
Yeah.
Brain on.
It's brilliant. So how do people know they're doing it right, or is there no right way? How do they know they're moving forward with love if they're still angry and crying and snotting, repeating?
I'm going to give you a super simple answer. I believe people are doing it right when it feels right.
Okay.
That's the only answer I have for that. If it feels right, it is right.
Yeah.
If it doesn't feel right, you're doing something wrong. Like that simple. It is really, there's no other way to explain that. And well, the other word would be trust your gut instinct, trust your intuition. If it doesn't feel right, it's probably not right.
Yeah, but it's quite hard, isn't it? Because it might not feel right because you've still got society going like, can't believe you're smiling. Oh my gosh, she's done her hair.
Exactly.
Going on holiday, where my so-and-so died. I was like, so I think it's quite hard, isn't it, to let your inner voice be louder.
Of that. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. It is hard. I mean, grief can be hard anyway, but I think, when you've got people watching you grieve, it's just really difficult sometimes, isn't it?
As long as they just watch, it's fine. But when the judgment becomes too loud, that's when it interferes with your own.
Cheering from the sidelines, very off-putting.
Yeah.
Bless you. I could speak to you all day. I absolutely love it. I know we're both very driven to make, grief a positive, empowering kind of experience. Not for everyone, but for those who are feeling stuck and want to try new ways. They've tried the crying, the snotting, they've listened to society, but, they're young, they've still got the life, they've got family watching them. So I could speak to you all day. How can people get in contact with you? You've got your book. Tell us about your book.
So it's quite easy to get in contact with me because the book and the movement have got the same title, and that's Loving Life After Loss. So my book just comes as a Kindle version, so it's an ebook on Amazon, and Loving Life After Loss, if you put the title in, you should find it. And also when you go into Facebook groups, so my movement is a Facebook group at the moment, but not just that, there's groups outside of that group for various healing journeys and programs that are run. There's a retreat coming up in November. I absolutely look forward to that, because that's where we're going to incorporate the body work that we also chatted about in the pre-chat. I believe that body work needs to be done. There's grief stuck in cellular memory, all of that. So there's a program coming up for people who want to help as well, who've experienced loss themselves and have healed to a point where I'm like, I want to help other people just like you, Marie. Yes, please contact me. I need you, because I've got this huge vision of changing the face of grief globally. There's 300 million people, don't know if you knew that, each year closely affected by a significant loss each year. So I need an army of love. I want people to help me change the face of grief. And there's all
Enroll
of that.
me.
The best way, yes, please. Give you the details. So the best way is to either look for Loving Life After Loss on Facebook as a group, on Amazon as an ebook, or literally my website, which is mariealessi.com. So it's quite simple to find me in either way.
Fabulous. I just love speaking to you. I mean, so we've spoken before,
and
I've been on your podcast, but I just think to be such a radiant being after, such love with Rob, I just think you're the most inspirational woman. I really do, Marie.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you is a rubbish word, because honestly, I appreciate you so much. So thank you for being here today and for helping all the listeners.
Thank you for having me.
If you enjoyed today's episode, please ensure you subscribe and do leave a positive review. If you would like to create your own positive changes, head on over to shelleyfknight.com and you can buy yourself a copy of Positive Changes, a self-cookbook. If you want some positivity until the next show, come join us over on Facebook. That's Shelley F. Knight, Life Goes On. So I've been Shelley F. Knight, and as always, you've been amazing.